My name is Sophie. I am 29 years old. I always believed in love. I thought marriage would last forever. But I was mistaken. I met Daniel 5 years ago. He worked at the same office as me. He was kind and polite. Every morning he brought me a cup of coffee. Every afternoon he asked how I was feeling. I used to smile a lot whenever I was with him. He wasn't wealthy. He didn't drive a fancy car. But he made me feel secure. He made me laugh. He told me I was unique. I began to fall in love with him. I believed he felt the same way about me. One day he asked me to go out with him. I agreed. We went for a walk in the park and talked for hours. I felt truly happy. It was simple, but it felt perfect. After a few months he proposed to me. He said he didn't want to wait anymore. He told me life was short. I was shocked but also thrilled. Said yes. We had a small wedding with just close family and friends. He looked at me with loving eyes and said, "You are my everything." I trusted him. I believed every word he said. We moved into a small flat. I loved our place. It was peaceful and tidy. We didn't have much money, but that didn't matter to me. I believed love was all we needed. In the first year, Daniel was caring. He helped with the cooking. He made tea for me when I felt tired. On weekends we watched movies and shared meals together. He often said he was lucky to have me. But slowly things started to change. He began coming home late. He said he had extra work. He started checking his phone in another room. He began taking his calls outside. When I asked him questions, he smiled and said, "Nothing's wrong." He stopped helping much around the house. When I spoke, he didn't really listen. He felt distant. Even when he sat beside me, I felt alone. I began to feel worried. I asked him again, "Is everything all right?" He said, "Yes, just feeling tired." I wanted to believe him. I wished things could return to how they used to be. One day I cooked his favorite meal. I cleaned the entire house. I wore the dress he once said he liked. I waited for him with hope in my heart. But he didn't come home on time. He came back very late. He looked surprised to see the food on the table. He didn't even apologize. He said he forgot. Then he went to take a shower. I felt heartbroken, but I didn't cry. I just cleared the plates and went to bed. That night I stayed awake. I stared at the wall in silence. My mind was filled with questions. I started to think maybe I had done something wrong. Maybe he didn't love me anymore. One morning I noticed something strange. There was lipstick on his shirt collar. It wasn't my color. I held the shirt in my hands for a long time. Then I quietly put it back. I didn't ask him anything that day. I was too afraid. But after that I became more watchful. I smelled perfume on his jacket. He had never used perfume before. He began saying new words. He even changed his hairstyle. I wasn't foolish. I knew something was wrong. But I was still too scared to speak up. I hoped maybe it would stop. Maybe he would go back to the man he once was. Then one Sunday he said he needed to go to the office. But it was quiet outside. Called the office phone. No one answered. Waited. I sat in the kitchen for hours. He came back in the evening. He looked tired but also happy. I looked into his eyes. He smiled, but it wasn't the same smile I used to know. I asked, "Where were you?" He said, "I told you I was at work." I wanted to shout, but I didn't. I just looked at him and said, "I called your office." His expression changed. For just a second. Then he laughed and said, "I was in a meeting." I didn't believe him. But I stayed silent. I just went into the bedroom and closed the door. That night I couldn't sleep again. My heart was full of pain. I thought about our early days together. The walks, the tea, the little jokes. I missed those moments. I missed the man I had married. The next day I went for a walk by myself. I walked to the park where we had our first date. I sat on a bench and watched people around me. I saw couples holding hands. I saw children playing happily. I felt like I was the only person there without love. I didn't want to tell anyone. I didn't want to share it with my friends. I didn't want to worry my parents. I just wanted the truth. When I returned home, Daniel was watching TV. He smiled and asked, "How was your walk?" I looked at him and said, "I know you're hiding something." He looked surprised. Then he said, "What do you mean?" I replied, "You're not the same. You don't look at me the way you used to. You lie about work. You even smell different." I told him I had seen lipstick on his shirt. He didn't respond at first. Then he stood up and said, "I think you're just tired. You're overthinking." He left the room. I sat there quietly. My hands felt cold. My eyes were dry. I didn't want to cry anymore. I just wanted the truth. That night, I waited until he fell asleep. Then I took his phone. I didn't want to do it, but I needed to know. I looked through his messages. What I found broke my heart. There were many texts. From a woman named Rachel. She called him my love. She sent him pictures. She asked when he would meet her again. He replied, "Soon." My wife doesn't know. I kept staring at those words over and over. My wife doesn't know. He had been lying to me. Every single day. He told me he loved me. But he was spending time with someone else. I placed the phone back where it was. I sat down on the floor. I covered my face. But I didn't cry. I just sat there in silence. That night I couldn't sleep. I watched the sky grow darker. Then I watched it turn light again. And in that moment I knew something had to change. Before I continue with the rest of my story, I need to ask, where are you listening from? Just knowing someone is hearing me and understands me gives me strength. The next morning I made tea. I placed 2 cups on the table. Daniel walked into the kitchen. He said, "Good morning." I didn't smile. I looked directly at his face. He sat down and sipped his tea. I asked him, "Who is Rachel?" He looked at me. His expression changed. He asked, "Why are you asking?" I replied, "I saw your phone." He stayed quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It was nothing." I said, "Please just tell me the truth." He stood up and said, "It's a small thing. I made a mistake." I asked, "Do you love her?" He didn't answer. He looked down at the floor. Then he said, "I don't know." It felt cold inside. I stared at my cup. My hands stayed still. I said, "You lied to me." He replied, "I didn't want to hurt you." I said, "But you did hurt me." Then he grabbed his bag and left the house. I sat alone. I didn't cry. I just felt exhausted. I looked at the door. He was gone. The house was silent. I washed the cups. Then I went to the bedroom. I sat on the bed and looked out the window. So many questions filled my mind. Why did he lie? When did it all begin? What did I do wrong? That evening he returned home. He said, "Can we talk?" I asked, "Talk about what?" He said, "I want to fix this." I looked at him. "You were happy with her?" I said, "No." He replied, "It was just talking." I looked straight at him and said, "You sent her pictures. You called her my love. That's not just talking." He looked down and said, "I know. I'm sorry." That night I slept in a different room. Closed the door. I didn't want to see his face. I turned off the light and stared at the wall. My heart felt heavy, but I stayed calm. In the morning I left the house. I went to visit my friend Emma. She opened the door. She asked, "Are you okay?" I said, "No. I need to talk." We sat in her kitchen. I told her everything. I said he was seeing another woman. Her name is Rachel. I had seen the messages. Emma stayed quiet. She gave me a cup of tea. She said, "You didn't do anything wrong." I looked at my hands. They were trembling. I said, "I don't know what to do." Emma said, "Come stay here for a few days." I said, "Okay. Thank you." I went back home in the afternoon. Daniel wasn't there. Packed my clothes, picked up my phone, took my bag. I looked around the room. It was silent. I placed my house key on the table. Then I walked out. I stayed at Emma's house. I slept in her small room. It was warm and tidy. She gave me meals. She let me rest. She didn't ask too many questions. I was truly grateful. Daniel sent many messages. He wrote, "Please talk to me." He said, "I'm sorry." He said, "I miss you." But I didn't reply. I wasn't ready. After 3 days he called me. I didn't answer. Then he sent one last message. It said, "I ended things with Rachel. Please come back." I read the message but I didn't believe it. I remembered his face when I asked him the truth. He didn't apologize right away. He only stopped when I found the messages. He didn't love me the way I had loved him. One day I returned to the apartment. Daniel wasn't home. I opened the door and packed more clothes. Took my books. I saw a photo of us hanging on the wall. We looked happy in it, but that moment wasn't real. He hadn't been honest. I placed the photo in a drawer. I shut it. Then I left again. I didn't cry. I didn't wait. I walked slowly down the stairs. I stepped outside. I took a deep breath. The air was cold, but I felt free. That night I sat on Emma's couch. I drank warm tea. I looked out the window at the sky. I saw the stars shining above. I felt sad but also stronger. I knew he would keep sending messages. I knew he would say more things. But I wasn't going back. The next morning Daniel called again. He asked, "Can we meet?" I said, "No. I need time." He said, "I'll wait." I didn't reply. Emma smiled at me and said, "You're brave." I said, "No. I'm just tired." She said, "But you're still strong." I started helping around her house. I helped with cooking. I helped clean. I began searching for a small place to live. Emma said, "You can stay here longer." I replied, "Thank you, but I want my own room." I found a small apartment near her home. It had one bed, one table, and a tiny kitchen. We moved in. It was peaceful. I enjoyed the quiet. I bought fresh bedsheets. I made tea every morning. I read simple books. I took walks in the park. Daniel kept trying to reach out. He left flowers at my door. He sent more messages. One message said, "I'm not the same without you." But I didn't reply. One day he waited outside my new apartment. I saw him through the window. He stood there holding a box. He looked around. I closed the curtain. I turned off the light. After a while, he walked away. That night I felt sad again. But I also felt safe. Made soup. Ate alone. I cleaned the kitchen. I went to bed early. My heart felt calm. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I would meet someone new. But I knew this. I didn't want to live with lies. I didn't want a husband who said "I love you" to me and to another woman at the same time. I woke up early. I opened the window. The sun was shining. The sky was clear. It was a new day. Made tea. I sat at the table. My phone was on the chair. I looked at it. There were new messages from Daniel. One said, "I'm sorry." Another said, "Can I see you?" Put the phone down. I looked out the window again. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to see him. But I wanted to hear the truth. I wanted to ask why he hurt me. I picked up the phone and sent one short message. It said, "We can meet at the park, just once." He replied quickly. "Thank you," he wrote. That afternoon I put on my coat. I walked to the park. The wind was cold. The trees swayed gently. I saw Daniel standing by a bench. He noticed me and stood up. I walked toward the bench. We both sat down. I didn't smile. He didn't either. He said, "Thank you for coming." I said nothing. I stared at the ground. He said, "I know I did wrong." I stayed silent. He looked at me and said, "I lied to you. I broke your trust. I'm sorry." I asked, "Why did you do it?" He looked down. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I wasn't happy. Felt lost. I met someone new. I made a mistake." I said, "You had a wife. You had a home. Why didn't you talk to me?" He said, "I didn't want to hurt you, but I hurt you anyway. I know that." I looked at him. I said, "You looked at me every day. You said I love you. But you said it to her too. He said, I ended it. I told her goodbye. I want you back. I shook my head. I said, you should have thought of that before. He said, please give me one more chance. I said, no. I gave you many chances. You lied every time. He looked sad. He said, I still love you. I stood up. I looked at him one last time. I said, goodbye, Daniel. Then I walked away. He didn't follow me. I walked home slowly. I looked at people on the street. Some were laughing. Some were quiet. Felt peaceful. When I got home, I made tea. I sat on the floor and sipped it slowly. I looked at the wall. Felt calm inside. The next morning, I cleaned my small apartment. I washed my clothes. I swept the floor. I made toast and eggs. I opened the window. The air felt fresh. I sat near the window. I listened to the birds. That week I began walking more. I walked to the market. I walked to the park. I walked to a small lake nearby. One day, I saw a woman sitting on a bench. She looked about my age. She smiled at me. Smiled back. Her name was Helen. She had a small dog. The dog jumped toward me. I laughed. She said, he likes you. We talked for a few minutes. She lived on my street. She was kind. She said, I like your smile. We met again the next day. We walked in the park. We talked about food and music. We talked about everyday things. I didn't talk about Daniel. I wasn't ready. But I felt better around Helen. She was kind and funny. Some days she brought her dog. Some days she brought apples. I brought tea in a bottle. We sat on a bench and drank together. My apartment was small, but it was enough. I had a table, a chair, a bed, and a little kitchen. It was peaceful. It was clean. It was mine. At night I made dinner. I listened to soft music. I read simple books. I went to bed early. One evening Daniel came to my door. I didn't open it. I watched him through the window. He stood there for 5 minutes. Then he left. He sent one more message. It said, please forgive me. I didn't reply. I placed my phone in a drawer. I didn't want to look at it anymore. Days went by. I saw Helen again. She brought me flowers. She said, you look happy today. I said, I feel okay now. We walked around the lake. We talked about holidays and the seasons. We talked about her dog. She asked, are you married? I said, I was. Not anymore. She looked at me gently. She said, I'm sorry. I said, it's okay. The next day I bought a plant. I placed it near the window. I watered it every morning. It made my room feel alive. I started writing new words in a notebook. I wanted to learn new things. I wanted to keep my mind strong. So I made a new routine. Wake up early. Eat healthy. Clean the home. Go for a walk. And smile whenever I can. I saw children playing outside. I saw elderly people sitting on benches. I saw dogs running through the grass. It felt calm and safe. One morning I walked past my old street. I saw the building where I had lived with Daniel. I paused and looked at it for just a moment. Then I kept walking. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I just felt finished. That chapter of my life was closed. A new chapter had already begun. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and share. More emotional and inspiring stories are coming soon.